Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Edward W. Said London Lecture. I'm Jude Kelly, the Artistic Director of the Southbank Centre. It's a wonderful thing for us to be able to host this. It's wonderful for many reasons. Not least, of course, is our relationship with Daniel Barenboim, who's giving this lecture. He's been an extraordinary friend to us. He started with us, well, when he was 13. And that's not so long ago, but it's long enough for it to feel like he's got a lifelong commitment to his work here as an artist. And for that, we're very grateful, and it gives us great joy. But of course, the focus of this lecture is about the power of art and the meaning of art. And we at Southbank Centre have this amazing history, which we draw on daily. Many of you will know, but some may not, that this is the site in 1951 where the Festival of Britain was created. And it was created after a war that truly had appalled and terrified humanity. It was when barbarity and technology combined in an appalling way. And after that war, the world knew it couldn't conduct its affairs in the same way again. And it looked at the role that art played, and it asked, what is it that art should do more and differently? And on this particular site, they built the Festival of Britain. And it took the phrase from the war artists, the propaganda of the imagination. 50% of the artists who made the Festival of Britain were refugees themselves, many of them under 30. And on their shoulders, we build our work. Because in a sense, what we're trying to do daily is think about what is it that makes humans fall back in love with other humans. How do you keep and maintain peace? How do you take many different tribes, whether they were the classical music tribe or the rap artists tribe or the visual artists tribe or the people who didn't think of themselves as tribal in terms of the arts at all, but how do you make them all feel that in the end it's one world that we belong to? Well, of course, at Southbank Centre we believe that art and culture is the foundation of identity, belongs to all of us, and therefore a space like Southbank Centre is there to create a space for sharing all of our stories and putting spotlights on stories that are perhaps rarely heard. We've just finished our festival Alchemy, which looks at the vast treasures of all the arts across the subcontinent, India and all her other landscapes, Sri Lanka, Nepal, Bangladesh, Pakistan, Afghanistan. And a backdrop to that experience for us was that a young woman running an art centre much smaller than this, but active and with the same belief systems, Sabine Mahmoud, she was shot 4 weeks ago for putting on democratic discussion. She was killed, her mother was seriously injured, and her mother came to join us at this festival, which finished on Monday, really in solidarity with the fact that culture is a space that must retain the right for openness, discussion, and love. The lecture that Daniel Barenboim is giving tonight is going to be introduced by Jacqueline Rose. And I can't think of anybody more fitting than Jacqueline to do this. And she's also going to conduct the Q&A afterwards, which you'll join us for, obviously. She has an extensive career as an academic and a writer and a thinker. And she's internationally known for her work on feminism, psychoanalysis, literature and politics, and the ideology of Israel and Palestine. She has many books. I'm not going to read you all of them. Recently, she published a book, Women in Dark Times, which I interviewed her about, The Last Resistance, The Haunting of Sylvia Plath. She's particularly taken by the fact that her States of Fantasy and The Last Resistance have formed the basis of musical compositions by the acclaimed young American composer Mohammed Fairouz. And she feels that since this is a musical evening, this is a thing that you need to know. She's the co-founder of Independent Jewish Voices in the UK and a fellow of the British Academy. And now at Birkbeck, before that she taught at Queen Mary University of London as Professor of English. And in the autumn 2014, she took up her role as Professor of Gender Studies in Cambridge. This lecture could not be possible without the support of the A.M. Catan Foundation, the Mosaic Room, and the London Review of Books, and of course the organising committee. So I'm looking forward to the stimulation and thought-provoking nature of everything that Daniel always brings us. Can I welcome Jacqueline Rose?
Good evening. Thank you all for being here. It is a great pleasure and privilege to introduce Daniel Barenboim this evening. He is, as you will all know, probably the most distinguished musician of our time. In fact, I think we could take out the probably. In 2009, The Guardian named the noughties as Barenboim's decade. So let's just say that today in 2015, Barenboim's decade shows no signs of coming to an end. By any standards, his is a unique and remarkable trajectory, which has seen him move from his first international debut performance as a pianist at the age of 10 in Vienna and Rome to, amongst too many musical performances, honors, accolades, and prizes as pianist and conductor to even try to mention, to being music director of the Chicago Symphony Orchestra, where he has been named by the musicians honorary conductor for life, and then today the conductor of the Staatskapelle in Berlin as the chief conductor for life. Some of us here, I'm sure, will have had the pleasure of listening him conduct that orchestra with Martha Argerich in May, followed by their wondrous duet encore. They go back a long way. It was, by general consensus, a historic musical occasion. But since this is the Edward Said London lecture, let me be a little more political and personal. For Daniel Barenboim is unique in other ways, offering to the world the finest, most discriminating sense of what music is and what it can do, as I'm sure we will hear this evening. More than once I have had the extraordinary opportunity to watch him rehearse in Seville the musicians of the West-Eastern Divan Orchestra, which, as you know, he founded with Edward Said. One year I arrived when the maestro was in Salzburg playing Bartók, conducted by Boulez, which we all watched on huge monitors in the evening, a treat in itself, after the orchestra had rehearsed during the day without him under another conductor with immense care and attention. But I will never forget the moment when Maestro Barenboim arrived and started working with the musicians, after 5 minutes of which I can promise you that it was a different and differently inspired orchestra in that room. The concentration, the impassioned guidance, the sense of the momentous task they faced, its pleasures and its risks, was as overwhelming as the sound they began to make. At the end of his life, Edward Said said the orchestra was the most important thing he had done. No small part of my pleasure in Seville was realizing to what extent that love had been honored and taken to the next stage. In Parallels and Paradoxes, the wonderful conversations between the two of them, Edward Said talked of the transformation Daniel Barenboim achieved with Arab and Israeli musicians who had no reason to listen, let alone to like each other, as, to quote Said, one set of identities was suspended or superseded by another set. There was an Israeli group, and a Russian group, and a Syrian group, a Lebanese group, a Palestinian group, and a group of Palestinian Israelis. All of them suddenly became cellists and violinists. Not normalization, as Daniel Barenboim has so clearly stated, but another way of thinking. Next month, a new project in the same spirit will begin in Berlin when the Barenboim Side Academy will open in the former stage depot of the Staatsoper unter den Linden. Its aim will be to educate young students from the Middle East and Europe in music and the humanities. As some of you will also know, Daniel Barenboim holds dual Israeli and Palestinian citizenship. In this seemingly unending conflict, he embodies in his person the very dialogue he enables in music, word, and deed. This year would have been the 80th birthday of Edward Said. There is no one in the world more fitting to give this lecture. Maestro Barenboim, we welcome you with deep appreciation and gratitude.
Ladies and gentlemen, I committed the great mistake to listen to Jacqueline Rose's introduction, and it made me think maybe I should forego the honor of giving this lecture. You know, I have been on the stage 65 years, not on this stage, it didn't exist then. I've been on the stage 65 years. For the first 15 or 20 years of those, when two people met and one would say, I heard Daniel Barenboim yesterday, the other question was, what did he play? After that, for many years, the same, yesterday evening I heard Daniel Barenboim, what did he conduct? But now I'm getting to the point when they said, last night I heard Daniel Barenboim, what did he say? And so I'm a little bit, well, whatever it is. You know what I mean. In any case, on a more serious note, I'm thrilled to be here today to deliver the 2015 Edward Said London Lecture. Today's lecture takes place here in the Queen Elizabeth Hall at one of London's most important musical venues. So it is fitting it should be about music, which was one of Edward Said's great passions in life. Making music an essential part of social life has always been a key goal of mine. I deeply believe in the greater importance of music and in its ability to influence and shape who we are as human beings. Edward Said shared this belief, and it was in this common spirit that after years of friendship, we embarked on the adventure, and I have to say, without any modesty, incredible success story that is the West-Eastern Divan Orchestra. As many of you know, we founded the orchestra together in 1999, and I've been proud to see it grow into one of the finest orchestras I have ever had the joy to conduct. From the outset, our approach in our workshops and seminars has been a comprehensive one in that we focus on understanding what it means to listen to each other, both as musicians and as human beings. Learning to listen in that way sensitizes us both for ourselves and the world around us. The imperative word here, however, is learning, as basic education in music is the essential prerequisite to be able to understand music more comprehensively and let it play an important role in our lives. Sadly, music instruction in schools everywhere has decreased sharply over recent decades, to the extent that an alarming percentage of children and teenagers get little or no music education whatsoever. Music is often only an optional subject at secondary schools. There are not enough qualified teachers, and music is often seen as a subject that can be cut from the curriculum if there is a shortage of teachers, since music is not one of the core subjects as mathematics, literature, science, and foreign languages are. Yet, a basic knowledge of music always used to be considered part of a well-rounded education, just like a basic knowledge of literature or maths. And the worst thing about the decline in recent years is that it affects European countries which have been known for their proud musical tradition, as reflected in the long list of important composers and musicians who form the basis of European music. That is why I am calling for music once more to be taught in schools on a par with literature, mathematics, or biology. Not only so that listeners can have better auditory experiences later in life, thanks to the schooling, and also so we are guaranteed educated audiences in the long term, although those are extremely desirable additional benefits. The big reason for raising the status of music in schools, however, is that music has to be considered one of the elemental components of human education, since it can be instrumental in significantly improving people's quality of life. The scientist Antonio Damasio has conducted studies that show that the human brain processes music in a very special way. He writes, and I quote, "Auditory stimuli enter the brain at the stem, a location that gives them direct access to the areas of the brain that regulate vital functions, in particular those that enable us to have feelings and react emotionally." This anatomical peculiarity has created a special link between music and the most important life-regulating mechanisms at individual as well as social level. End of quote. The implication is that systematic exposure to music positively affects the development of the brain and is therefore extremely important for the neural maturation process, which is associated with sociability, general perceptiveness, and intelligence. This finding leads us to conclude that our brain, our IQ, and our faculty for sensibility will be improved if we have contact with music from an early age. Music allows people to have different sensations simultaneously. That would be inconceivable without music. In and through music, grief and joy, for example, or loneliness and sociability can coexist. Music can mean different things for people and even different things for the same person at different times. This kind of contrapuntal experience, a favorite word of Edward Said, contrapuntal. This kind of contrapuntal experience is important for human existence, but would not be possible to the same extent if we did not have music. More than that, music can enrich our lives as it fosters the development of the finest human qualities in collective situations. Music, unlike sport, is not the subject to the usual laws of competition. Music has to function as a communal experience. The experiences I've had working with orchestras, in particular the West-Eastern Divan, confirms this assumption. The young musicians have an advanced knowledge of music, which means they are prepared to listen as a group and make music as a group, even in a very delicate and tricky social context. In the process, they have succeeded in overcoming supposed barriers. Music has taught them not only the possibility, but the necessity to listen to other voices, voices that are contrapuntal or commenting. This, in a certain way, is more important than the fundamental democratic right to vote. In music, every voice has a responsibility towards the other in speed, in dynamics, and intensity. The difference between just producing beautiful sound and making music is that the latter means striving to create an organic whole of all the different elements, of oneness. There should always be a connection between the different elements in music making, not allowing any separation from the context. Music is often seen as a way to escape the human condition. Hearing music is meant to enable people to take time out from reality. But this is hearing without listening. While there is nothing inherently wrong with that approach, in my opinion, music should be giving us lessons for life, as well as helping us to escape when necessary. I myself have had the experience as a youngster of playing mature music, like Beethoven's later piano sonatas, without having first come up against the slings and arrows of life. So my playing was not a product of my life experience, rather the other way around. My musical experiences have shown me how to live my life. In the 21st century, it is our job to get exactly this point across to people, to show them that they can use what music has taught them to help themselves to live their lives. Music has a spiritual component that can be expressed only through a purely physical medium, sound. It is that combination of the spiritual and the physical that gives music its power of expression. That is why music should be taught first and foremost as a practical skill, for instance, by means of group singing lessons and relaxed familiarization with instruments, starting at a very early age. Our experience of practice in the Berlin music kindergarten, for example, show that 80% of children who study music in such a playful manner at the kindergarten continue with it when they leave it. 80%. This trend also creates the potential of developing new audiences for classical music, an important aspect in the ongoing debate about subsidies for music. Specifically, letting new audiences develop would create a fairer ratio between subsidies and the public, whereas both government institutions and private donors are currently often criticized for subsidizing an activity for a small elite. That has to change. Providing a solid foundation in music education to a greater part of the population will lead to a larger percentage of the population remaining interested in music later in their life. This makes the excuse that subsidies are elitist and too expensive invalid. There are many instances of music instruction. They range from musical grammar schools, such as the Bach Gymnasium in former East Germany, and the classical schools of music, to extracurricular music activities, youth choruses, and orchestras. What I would love to see in the future is a choir and an orchestra in every school. We have a long way to go in that direction, but we have to lay the foundation now for a system in which music forms part of the basic education of every child and teenager, rather than being just an exotic subject for a few children. On the other hand, the fact that in music schools there is little or no instruction in other spiritual disciplines adds to music being perceived as an ivory tower. Music cannot be considered an abstract subject, but requires as rich a supplementary education as possible, because the associations necessary to value music need to be drawn from history, politics, or literature. It is the art of thinking in and with music. This approach to teaching and studying is one of the founding principles of the Barenboim Said Academy, which will open in Berlin in 2016. The Academy will offer a thorough music education program, but also teach a strong philosophical component. While not offering a specialized philosophy degree, the Academy program endeavors to give the students more comprehensive learning opportunities in the musical studies through philosophy. We will work, for example, with Spinoza's definition of three kinds of knowledge. The first kind, opinion or imagination. The second kind, observation. And thirdly, adequate knowledge of the essence of things. This is a direct quote. Through debating these notions of knowledge, it will be my privilege to help the students approach music itself with that newly found understanding of knowledge. Maybe we could envisage both for music and non-music schools a new form of digital education, initiative which would facilitate access and give every family and child the possibility of participating by giving them the feeling that they personally are included and not merely part of a multitude. This would significantly, improve the quality of life for individuals and social groups across the world. Thank you very much.
Sir, it's an honor to ask you a question. The first piece of music I ever heard was at the age of 6 weeks old. Your recording of the Emperor Concerto. My mother can probably name the year. I'm a little bit humbled at the chance to ask you a question, but you said something that resonated, which was that because you played the great works early in life, you hadn't yet had the chance to let life shape the way you played. Could you talk about how the experience of life has changed how you play? I hope that's not too deep.
I feel you're putting me on the psychiatrist's couch. No, I remember my father, who was my teacher, was often criticized for allowing me to play, especially late Beethoven sonatas, when I was 12, 13. And I remember playing the Hammerklavier Sonata at the Wigmore Hall at age 15, and there was a barrage of, but my father's argument was that, first of all, maturity has nothing to do with age, that there are young people that can be very mature and old people that can be very immature. And I think he was right. I look at myself. And he also said that the maturity that I might or might not get with the music would not come if the music was left in the drawer. And therefore, the earlier I started to deal with them, the more chances I had to achieve some kind of maturity. I'm telling you all this because I was very conscious of all of that. And the fact that it was like this meant that every time I had an important experience in my life of different kind, automatically my brain would translate it into something to do with music. Both positive and negative events or experiences. And I began to associate a lot of things that happened in my life, people I met, things I read and all that, to associate that with music, rather than the other way around. And I find myself, even now, at age 72, when something of particular importance happens in my life, to almost automatically think of a passage of music, or something in a passage of music which I didn't quite see in that way. And this experience that I had helps me somehow get a new idea about the music. I don't know whether it makes any sense to you. But thank you for asking me to say that, because I understood something about myself. I told you I was that you put me in the psychiatrist couch.
There's a question in the front row here, or is there one at the back there that you've seen? By all means.
Thank you, and thank you for a fascinating lecture and for all the pleasure you've given me, and I suspect all of us over the years. My question actually follows directly on from that, and I was going to ask a very similar one, which is, in the same part of your lecture, you said something very intriguing about how music can help teach you how to live your life. So you just answered how life has affected your music. I wondered if you could comment on how music has affected the way you live your life. Back on the psychiatrist chair, I'm afraid.
You know, when you take a piece of music, even a very large one, like a huge movement in a Bruckner symphony, in Bruckner 5, or the first movement, or the last movement for that matter, of the 8th Bruckner, such massive things, and you see how very, very special and inspired moments are over within a bar or two. And how often have we experienced in our lives that very special moments are so fleeting and we don't want to let them go, but you have to let them go. Even Bruckner, with his heavenly length, lets them go. In other words, shall I say, the ever-flowing feeling of music keeps one aware of the ever-flowing movement of life. And also taught me, for instance, that sometimes we tend to underline an important moment of something we read, or of something that happened, or somebody we met, and means, you know, suddenly my life will change. It doesn't. There is only one moment, there's only one climax in every piece of music. Everything that is before it leads up to it, and everything that comes after it either goes down or maintains the feeling of that. And therefore, this has taught me not to give undue importance to things which are difficult or unpleasant. And to always remember, I mean, it sounds like very cheap psychology I'm giving you now, but for me it is how I lived my life. And there is always the feeling of long term in the music, which is so difficult to find in life, especially in moments of distress, let alone desperation or suffering. And when we get into these moments, we feel this absolutely, I will never be able to get rid of this depression. I will never be able to get rid of this distress. And we do. We always do. And this in the music is so clear. Furtwängler said a wonderful sentence, invented a word in German that doesn't exist. Fernsehen, television, Fernsehen means seeing far away. He invented the word fernhören, to be able to hear far away. What did he mean by that? He meant by that a musician has to be able to hear in his imagination the last note of a piece when he plays the first. In order to have this arch, we will never be able to live our life like this, but it is a wonderful example that he has given. And because sound is ephemeral, in music, the flow of time is self-evident and natural.
There's a question at the front here.
Thank you. If I can maybe move you away from the psychiatrist chair for a second. You've talked very eloquently and passionately about the need for education starting at kindergarten level. Is there anything you think that either can be done or should be done for those of us that are now past kindergarten and school and never
Go
had...
back. Go back. Mentally, I mean, in a good sense. Go back and ask yourself questions and find, as a grown-up, you have instruments, tools at your disposal which little children don't have. Little children need somebody to show them all that. But grown-ups, I've seen many grown-ups, you know, whom I met and with whom I shared totally unmusical interests, but who became good friends and started coming to concerts, and they became terribly curious. And little by little, more knowledgeable.
But do you think there's anything that can be done to help that generation along? Because we can come to concerts and we can listen, but to have the opportunity to hear like this lecture tonight, and I've heard some of your stuff that's been sort of on YouTube and that. I mean, it's fascinating to hear those things that we never get, that we had never had the chance to hear and understand. Do you think, I don't know whether as part of the new academy, whether an institution like that might be a way to help educate sort of like the lost generation?
Well, the digital world is quite a complex subject to deal with, because it gives you a lot of false feelings, gives you a false feeling of intimacy, because you can really say unashamedly a lot of things that you would never say without the digital instrument. It gives this false sense of power that the President of the United States opened his Twitter, and within seconds, less than a minute, there are I don't know how many who call him a black monkey. I mean, this is a phenomenon of the digital world. Can you imagine? No matter what you think of Barack Obama as a politician, and I'm certainly not trying to defend that, because I have been very deeply disillusioned by what he has done, especially, but not exclusively, in the Middle East. So I don't have a political agenda to defend him, but it shows you the kind of racism that exists in the United States, and that people unashamedly write that because they can do that in the digital world. What I'm trying to say by this is that the digital world gives the human being today a very peculiar sense of self-importance, of ability to trespass certain areas, etc. But the digital world also gives us a lot of advantages, a lot of possibilities. And I think that the human being throughout history has been far more able to discover and invent things than be able to know how to use what he has discovered. I remember when television started really being part of daily life, and a lot of people say, this is terrible. The children will not do their homework, as if the little television set has a moral responsibility that the children have to do the thing. In other words, it's our duty as human beings to learn to deal with what we have invented. And the same thing with the digital world. And I'm convinced that if enough people get behind this and make a concentrated, direct effort to use the internet, to use the digital world, to instruct and to educate, it could have a very, very beneficial influence. Because the one absolutely, the one great advantage is that it makes the receiver as well as the sender, gives them the feeling of being able to communicate one-to-one. And this is a wonderful feeling. And this feeling of intimacy is worth months of teaching children in the school when they are bored by the teacher.
There's a question in the middle of the central rank.
Do you feel that Divan and La Sistema have...
El sistema.
El Sistema.
System is masculine, contrary to world opinion.
Of course. El Sistema. Have much in common in what they offer, in their philosophy, in what they achieve?
They have one point in common, and that is that they see music in the social context. Other than that, I think let's say the ethics are similar, but the aesthetics are different. No, I don't mean that in any arrogant way. I think that the musical, there comes a point where it is a fantastic thing that in a country which is in such disarray as Venezuela, with so much crime and violence, that children from these kind of areas come and learn to play music and to do that. This is a wonderful thing. But you know, you can only use music for a certain amount of time, in a certain way, in a limited way, for a limited amount of time. In the end, music is there for itself. It has the ability to inspire us, to teach us, but it is there for its own sake. You know, you cannot play a moment of exquisite beauty in the Debussy prelude on the piano with a social idea. And you cannot play Mahler symphonies, which God knows enough has been written about the Mahlerian psychoanalytical studies, etc., etc., etc. In the end, It sounds like a paradox, but it isn't. In the end, you can only make the final judgment and have the final pleasure as listener only on musical terms. It is very useful to know about the biography of the composer. It is useful to know what his ideas were. It is useful to know anything that one can find out about a composer. I was always fascinated by that. I was an avid reader of biographies. But in the end, you judge the music only on the musical values.
Hello. I hope you'll excuse a humble theatre practitioner sort of elbowing his way into the discussion. I like to think that sort of art is indivisible, that we each have a role to play. And an essential part of the role, I think, is that art is life-affirming. I wondered if you would like to offer your thoughts on that and the thoughts of where many hundreds of arts practitioners in this country have said, we will not work with the Israeli state or its ambassadors because we feel that is life-destroying.
I have to say, I don't understand why you limit that to art. It is true of every walks of life. I think the boycott movement, the BDS, is absolutely correct, is perfectly right and necessary, with one limitation or one criticism, and that is that it refuses any contact with anything that has to do with Israel. In other words, there is not enough differentiation. I think that there are people in Israel who think very different from the government. Artists and other people, writers, certainly, musicians, certainly. And by making a blind boycott, you deprive yourself of the possibility of making contact with people who disagree with you, member of the boycott, as much as equally about the policies of the government. And let us not forget one thing. The Israelis and the Palestinians are blessed or cursed to live either together or side by side, but certainly not back to back. And therefore, a boycott that is completely generalized and has no feeling for nuances takes away the possibility of ever imagining a future that will be different from what it is now. And it only then encourages policies, as we have read in recent days from the Foreign Ministry of Israel, where it is clear that the present government in Israel is not interested in a two-state solution. It is not interested in a one-state solution. It is interested in a Jewish, exclusively Jewish solution for all the territories. And that is unacceptable.
Am I correct in thinking that you would prefer people to support organizations in Israel and individuals, for example, something like Mahsam Watch or Emek Shaveh or some of the other peace organizations which are working with Palestinians within Israel, rather than to commit to a blanket boycott of anything Israeli?
I think so. I mean, I don't know the institutions that you mentioned, so I cannot comment on that. But I think that it is very short-term and not positive for any future for the Palestinians to boycott anything that has anything to do with Israel. Everything that has to do with the government policies, yes. But others are, I have felt for a long time that it was a pity before the situation got as bad as it is now, that many very intelligent and articulate Palestinians, politicians, writers, etc., refused to go to Israel to talk at the universities and all this, in other similar institutions. It is a pity because, you know, the conflict, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is completely asymmetrical, to start from the fact that Israel is a nation, a state, and a very powerful one, and the Palestinians are not. That Israel is the occupier, and Palestinians are the occupied, you know? But this kind of undifferentiated declarations, this from both sides, make this part of the conflict symmetrical. Lack of curiosity about the other, lack of understanding of the motivation of the other. And I think this is basically very negative for any future for both people. You know, last year, when we met with the musicians of the West-Eastern Divan, it was very difficult. It was during the Gaza war. It was very difficult. It was in July. And a few of them, not many, but a few of them, wrote to me before saying that they didn't think they could participate because they didn't feel like being with the other. And I answered each one, of course. And I said, please think it anew, because by staying away, you don't make it any better. You only make it easier for yourself. Please come. I promise you that the day the orchestra arrives, we will meet in the evening and have an open discussion, all of us together, about all of that. If after that you still feel that you cannot really take it and you don't want to stay with the other, I will understand it and you will be able to leave as freely as you came. And we had this meeting the first evening. It was very tough. Believe me, it was very tough. Because some of them have been there for years and they know, and you know, and they said, well, I thought I had a friend in so-and-so from the other side for so many years, and now I see that I don't, and there is no sympathy. And you Israelis don't have sympathy for the people that are being killed in Gaza, etc., etc., etc. And then the Israelis said, and you have no sympathy for this and no sympathy for that. And the discussion was going nowhere. And then, fortunately, one of them said to me, she says, why don't you tell us what you think about it? I said, because I want to let you see, but you know, we would be interested. And I said to them, I think that you are looking for the impossible. You will not find a Palestinian with all the history and all that, that will be sympathetic to an Israeli suffering, except maybe on a personal level of somebody he knows, and also not in the other direction. But you cannot expect that, because sympathy is an emotional quality. And in times of war, and in times of so much violence, which has been going on now for so many years, there is no room for this kind of emotion. But there is not only room, there is a necessity for compassion, which, other than sympathy, which is emotional. Compassion is a moral attribute. And I said, if there is in this room one Israeli that cannot feel compassion for what is going on in Gaza, and if there are Arabs, because there are many Arabs, not just Palestinians, who don't feel compassion for individual cases of Israelis, and I'm not evaluating them on equality, then your place is obviously not here. And I think this is the important point. The important point is not the emotional, because the emotional, we know, hatred pays the highest dividends into emotional excitement. But a moral quality of understanding that certain things cannot be done to the other and must be criticized, this, yes.
Hi. Hello. Hi. Hi. Can you hear me? Yeah.
Yes, yes. I don't know where you are, but
I'm here.
Oh, yes.
Hi. I wanted to ask you a question related to politics and inspiration. So my question is, where do you see us going, and how does the work of music and the work of art can actually have an effect in the political world, which is seems very inward looking?
I don't think I'm qualified to answer that question, except for telling you that what you are talking about is not a question of inspiration, it's a question of intelligence, or rather, lack thereof. It's not a question of inspiration to have the attitude about the Falklands. It's not a question of inspiration to make an election campaign and think. It's also a question of intelligence. And the main problem with politics nowadays is that there is no possibility for strategy anymore. It has become purely tactical. This is as if I would start to play a piece of music and I would be enamored with a certain bar and I would play it 5 times slower because it is ever so beautiful, and I dream. And tactically, I think if I do this, then I will be able to come out of it, and all losing the long line of the strategy. And it is this mania with transparency that we have now, which has killed any possibility of strategic thinking. Even the moment of seduction when you meet a beautiful woman, if you are forced to dwell on every little thing you are trying to do in order to get her attention, never will you do that. Look at the politics, look at playing music. It's all the same. There is a wonderful book, if I may suggest it to you. I don't know whether it is translated into English, by Won-Chul Han, H-A-H-N. He's a wonderful Korean philosopher, and he wrote a book called The Transparent Society, and he talks about that. He talks about the problems that are created by this excessive transparency. But other than that, I'm afraid I'm not qualified to answer your question. I mean that quite sincerely.
There are 2 questions here, one here.
Yes, I would like to ask you to reflect on 16 years with the Divan Orchestra. You talked about the internal struggles last year we met, but actually how is the reception and how easy is it to come out and play in the Middle East, particularly in the current climate?
Well, we can't play in the Middle East. We cannot play. We played what is now considered a historic concert in Ramallah in 2005. totally impossible today to imagine something like this. We don't play, we cannot play in Israel, we cannot play in Palestine, obviously we cannot play in Syria. So there is no question about that. The Divan, in many ways, I think, has achieved a degree of notoriety in the musical centers of the world. We have always been deeply touched by the reception we get at our yearly concerts at the proms. We go to the Salzburg Festival, we go to Lucerne, we play in Berlin, we have our own festival in Buenos Aires, and this is really wonderful for the development of the orchestra and the message it gives. This year's festival in Buenos Aires at the beginning of August is called Festival of Music and Reflection. And so the same chamber music program is played once at the cathedral, once at the synagogue, and once at the Islamic Center, in the sense of trying to bring together the three communities. I must say the Pope was very instrumental in developing this kind of feelings amongst the different communities when he was still in Argentina. And I think that this is very important. I think other than that, it's important for the Divan, and not only for the Divan, to go to areas where music is not always present. You know, we have played everywhere, and we feel very welcome, and it's wonderful. But I think other orchestras too, I think the Staatskapelle and other orchestras as well should go to areas which do not get music. I had two wonderful experiences in that direction. One is when I played the first book of the Well-Tempered Clavier of Bach in Ramallah. I think it would be fair to say you could count on the fingers of your hands how many people had actually heard the first book of the Well-Tempered Clavier live, because of the situation. Already that allows it. And there was a degree of listening, there was a degree of concentration that was quite extraordinary. In a different way, and I'm not comparing the two, I went with the Scala Orchestra and Chorus to Ghana and conducted there the first concert of classical music, the Ninth Symphony by Beethoven. There was a hall more or less roughly this size, maybe a little larger, maybe 1,500 people, a theater in Accra. And the concert was broadcast live on all television stations in Ghana. And obviously, by definition, there could not have been more than 5 or 10 people who had been to a concert before. Maybe some of them who had studied in London and came to the festival hall, but insignificant. They had no idea what it was. You know, when I lifted the orchestra, they all stood up too. When the orchestra sat down in the applause, they sat down. They had no idea of the manners, and it was totally unimportant. They listened with a silence that I have really encountered only on very special occasions. They didn't understand anything at all about the Ninth Symphony of Beethoven, I am sure. How could they? But the most important thing about it, and that is that they were in the presence of a very important human statement. And I think that the European governments, I don't speak about the British government because I don't know enough about it, but the European governments have made a great mistake when new areas have opened in the world in the last 20 years. China, India, Brazil. When the leaders of the European countries go to these places, who do they take? The chairman of BMW in Germany, or Volkswagen, or Mercedes, and the other countries the same. They make good deals, and it's good. It's good for the taxpayers in Germany too, that there is an income from other sources. But we all know the Chinese are going to make, in a matter of 3, 5, maximum 10 years, just as good cars, cheaper, because they can imitate better than anybody else. So it would have been better to have sent the Berlin Philharmonic to play the Fifth Symphony by Beethoven, because that they can't imitate. Neither the Beethoven nor the orchestra. And I think, no, you laugh, but I'm serious. I think that our politicians very often do not have the faintest idea of what is European culture. And if you see how the population of the world is growing, somebody was telling me not long ago that the population of Africa will be plus 1.5 billion people by 2050. They don't know the first thing about European culture. And if we don't do that for ourselves, we must do that for our culture, which has enriched the lives of people in Europe for centuries and centuries. Because all this will disappear. It's of very little interest to millions of people in India, in Brazil, and in many other countries too. And this is what I would like to do in however many years I have left to be able to be active musically. I would like to go and explore all of that. I feel I have had enough admiration and glory and love from people like you, who after so many years still keep coming to hear me play, after so many years, probably thinking maybe by now he has gotten a little better. I laugh about it, but I'm sincerely touched, I'm sincerely touched. I played in London 60 years ago, almost 60 years ago, for the first time. And now that I come here to play the Schubert sonatas in the festival hall, and so many people come, it is a wonderful feeling. It is a feeling really of gratitude that people want to keep coming. Normally the memory is very short, especially in our days. So I've had my share of that, and I'm very grateful for that. And now I would like to have some time to spend exploring places where music has not been brought to. And I would go there with anybody, that could make it work. It's very early in the stages of planning. I'm only I'm only sharing with you really my thoughts, what I would like to do. I'm not yet clear how to do it. We are now at the beginning of negotiations with Ethiopia, maybe to go there with the Divan, because as you may know, Ethiopia is a very important country both for Jews and for Muslims. And I would like to go to other places. I would like to go to Iran. I would like to go to all of that. No lack of respect for London, Salzburg, or Berlin. Thank you very much.